And and I am going to share my screen again, and then we're going to get going. It's good to see you all. Here I am. Okay, so welcome everybody. Session 4, I think of 7, so we're more than halfway done, which is pretty amazing, or at least we will be after today. We're going to be talking about demand, understanding demand, and identifying a market opportunity. And this is what we're going to accomplish today. We're going to continue to get to know each other. We're going to understand how wealth creation is demand driven and what that means. And we're going to hear from Shauna Ratner, who I've had the pleasure of working with for a very long time. I don't really want to tell you how long, but it's been a long time. And I happen to have been in the right place at the right time when all of this was being dreamed up and researched and all of that. And Shauna can tell you more about that when I turn it over to her. But really happy to have her in the last cohort. People definitely, I remember in one of the some of the evaluations, people really appreciated guest speakers, which makes perfect sense, and particularly Shauna. So anyway, before we get going, I thought we'd do a bit of an icebreaker. I know this topic isn't as fun as I usually make them, but I thought it might be helpful as Shauna listens to understand where people are coming from in terms of sectors that they might be interested in pursuing. So, but yes, so we'll do, just name, organization, and maybe like where you are for just I know we all know each other, but for Shauna's benefit to understand who's here and where you're from, and any sectors that you're interested in thinking about using as we move, into the second half of this cohort experience. So, yes, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you all. Again, Melissa Levy. And I do all things wealth creation at NATO. I also do work with Shauna. Shauna and I still partner on quite a few projects together um, here and there. Right now, one in particular. But okay, so I'm going to just call on people because it just makes it easier. So, Lindsay.
Hey, Lindsay Brown, and I'm with the Lake Cumberland Area Development District in Kentucky, close to South Central Kentucky. And I would think for the sector, more of the, like, I guess the tourism, the natural part of where we're from, because there's a lot of tourism. I know I've spoken about that in the past. So that's the most, probably for me, the most interesting sector to learn about.
Cool. Great. Corinne.
Corinne Olson with CERTA, the Southeastern Regional Development Agency in Eastern Utah. The two sectors that I'm most interested in is the natural and built sector.
Natural. So it sounds like you're talking about forms of wealth. Is there an economic sector that that says to me maybe recreation and tourism,
Yeah.
but
Yep.
yes. Okay.
Yep. And then just
Cool.
building on our infrastructure. We're like trying to diversify our energy economy here since we're a coal community. So we have a lot of different built infrastructure. So we have like really good power lines, and we were one of the first places in the state of Utah to get fiber internet just with our local like technology industry here. So yeah, just really wanting to build on that to bring in extra or other organizations manufacturing just to diversify a little bit.
Cool. That's really helpful. Thanks, Corinne. Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda Whalen from Mohawk Valley Economic Development District. The Mohawk Valley is in the middle of New York State. And similarly, we're interested in ag, tourism, agritourism. And then another one that I don't know a lot about is the supply chain for semiconductors. We have like a whole thing going on in the region.
Okay. Nice variety. All right. Haley.
Hey y'all, my camera's not working. I was just saying I have too many tabs open and I don't want to restart my computer. So I'm still off camera. But I'm Haley Schulteis. I work at NATO with Ryan and Melissa and mostly doing transportation work. So I guess whatever sectors are related to transportation, what seems like all of them in some way.
Cool. Excellent. Thanks, Haley. Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Ryan. I'm with Concho Valley Council of Governments. We're in San Angelo, Texas, which is about the middle of the state. Being a council of governments, obviously, we kind of have a wider, broader thing. So I deal with everything that isn't dealt with in the rest of the building. But our big projects are like solid waste, some transportation. But right now, we're really focused on space launching, and also broadband. So it's kind of tying everything together and helping the whole region grow economically. And I've spoken before. There's nothing to do here. We've got a lot to do.
Great.
And by the way, Sawyer, I saw your orange cat. I've got 2 of those.
Okay. Thank you, Sawyer.
Hey, Sawyer Summers. I'm with the Regional Planning Commission of Greater Birmingham and Birmingham, Alabama. The sector I'm most interested in, man, that's a tough one. My heart says outdoor recreation, tourism, but my brain says probably biotech, because we do have, like our biggest economic driver and tractor to Birmingham is UAB. They're doing a lot of really good research. They have a lot of the health infrastructure and stuff like that, but we still suffer a remarkable amount of brain drain. And so, with Alabama being like a very employer friendly state, we have a lot of jobs coming in that are not really great wages. And I think to have healthy communities, you have to have healthy incomes. And I think biotech is probably one of our best options for that.
Okay. That's helpful. Okay, Ryan.
What's up, y'all? My name's Ryan Collins. I'm also at NATO with Haley and Melissa. I also work on the transportation team with Haley, but the other sectors that I'm interested in, other than like transportation related industries, is the broadband industry, energy industry, as well as any kind of industry related to like community resilience in Appalachia.
Okay. Shauna, do you want to do a quick introduction and then we'll keep moving?
Sure. Hi, I'm Shauna Ratner, and I'm the principal of Yellowwood Associates, and we're the firm that the Ford Foundation partnered with to essentially create what became WealthWorks. And so, yeah, I've been at this for a long time. I was actually at it before the Ford Foundation even came along. And they kind of said, would you like to do this? And I said, yeah, it's kind of my sandbox. I'd love to do it. I'd love to continue working with the different forms of wealth and think about how to frame economic development in terms that are real and applicable and make good use of the capitalist system as opposed to trying to throw it out, which I think is not a good plan. So yeah, that's me. And I'm happy to be here and talking with you. And I would love to have more time to explore all these things with you, but at least we'll have a little time today.
Cool. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to put my slides back up. We're going to just do a quick, okay, here we are. So I like to just reiterate each time what we're talking about broadly. So again, we're talking about creating wealth, variety of forms of wealth, rooting wealth in local people, places, and firms through local ownership and control, and building livelihoods by including people and firms on the economic and social margins. And again, these are our 8 capitals that we're talking about. I heard some of you mention them in your introductions, which is great. And these kind of run through all of what we're doing in this cohort. And again, we use those in terms of, oops, we've got Heather. in terms of understanding what we have, designing strategies that build on those and build them. And then we use them to measure how we're doing. And welcome, Heather. I know you just joined us. We kind of did introductions. Do you want to do a quick introduction? We just did, I didn't do a fun icebreaker today because we have a guest. But our what we were talking about is sectors, economic sectors of interest that we're interested in.
Hi, my name is Heather Devitt. I'm Deputy Director at Mohawk Valley Economic Development District. We cover the central part of New York State. And I'm going to go with Amanda on this one in ag technology. We do a lot of stuff with rural businesses, rural market entrepreneurs, includes a lot of farmers, a lot of agribusiness, a lot of agritourism.
Cool. Excellent. Thanks for letting me put you on the spot there. So welcome. And here's where we are. So this is the continuum we've kind of been working through, and we've kind of reached this area of value chain development. But the first piece of value chain development is really understanding demand, which is what we're doing today. And that's what Shauna's here to talk about. So that's where we are. Shauna, I am going to turn it back to you. And yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So as Melissa mentioned at the outset, she and I have worked together for a number of years. So as I go along, Melissa, if there's something you feel like I've missed, feel free to.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
So the first question really is, why start with demand? Why not do what everybody else does and start with supply? We grow beans. All we need to do is grow more beans. Life will be good. No, life will not be good. The reason we start with demand is because it's demand, not supply, that drives economies. And if we can create a strong relationship with demand partners, a strong, real relationship, not a relationship with AI, not a relationship with through a survey, but an actual personal relationship, press the flesh, honest to God relationship with the people who are going to purchase the goods and services that our supply chain develops. And I don't mean now with the end users, I mean now with the intermediate users, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But if we actually have a relationship with the people who are going to be responsible for purchasing our product, we win in a bunch of ways. One is, those are the folks, and by the intermediate buyers, I mean people like, so you wouldn't go to the kids in the cafeteria. You would go probably to the buyer of food for the entire school system, whoever that is, whatever entity that is, whether it's the superintendent level or whether it's a level above that, the state purchasing office or whatever it is. Those are the people I'm talking about as the buyers. It's not the end users, it's the intermediate buyers. But those are the people who have their fingers on the pulse of what's happening in the market. We all know that tastes and preferences change all the time. They change, at a whim. And so if you don't know as a producer of something what's changing in tastes and preferences in the market, then you're always one step behind. But if you have a real relationship with your demand partner, and they are in fact a partner, not just a buyer, then they're informing you on a regular basis. They're saying, you know what, this next season, we're going to need, those strawberries to be cut and frozen because we're finding that the fresh market is too perishable. Our schools aren't able to use them, but if you can cut them and freeze them, we can use a whole lot more local product. So, and I made that example up, but you guys get the idea. Okay. Really important. So think about, the people who used to make buggy whips when cars were coming into play. They didn't have the information in enough time to change what they were doing. So they ended up being put out of business because there was no longer a demand for buggy whips. The second thing that you get when you have a real relationship with demand players is you get preferred supplier status. Why? Because if you know your demand partner, then you're in a position to ask the questions about what it is that they need that they can't get anywhere else. Another way to say that is, what are the concerns that they have? What keeps them up at night? Right? Those are two slightly different questions, but they both get at what's true for that particular demand partner. And if you can work together with that demand partner to solve their problems, then that puts you in a very special position where they are going to turn to you first when they have a new issue, a new problem to solve, when they want the particular product that you can supply that no one else is quite supplying, because no one else has taken the time to really get to know them and listen to what they need. So it's the difference between producing a commodity and producing something that is special from the perspective of that particular buyer. The third piece is demand partners can also be potential investors. So if you can show me, if I'm a demand partner and you can show me that you can satisfy a problem that I have, like getting me the thing that I need in a timely way on a regular basis that I've been struggling with trying to find, then I might be willing to invest in helping you get that process to scale because it benefits me, right? It helps me grow. It helps me flourish. So it's in my best interest to invest in you. And so we have many instances in which demand partners become then investment partners in wealth creation value chains. And finally, it's the opportunity to have your products pulled through the value chain rather than pushed. We did workshops on wealth creation in foreign countries, including Nepal. And we had a bunch of people from villages in Nepal and some other countries show up at our workshop. And we used a box. We took a box, and we filled it with newspaper, and we tied rope to it. And we had the buyers at one end of this very long room and the value chain people at the other end of the very long room. And we had the value chain people essentially push the box across the floor to the buyer and try to sell them on what they had, right? And then we tried it the other way, and we had the box with the ropes on it, and we had them have a conversation with the buyer about the exciting things that were in the box and how those and to help understand how the things in the box would help the buyers meet their needs. And lo and behold, the buyers started to pull on the ropes, and they pulled the box across the room. So how much easier was that for the people who are actually on the value chain end, right? What you're looking for is to have your product pulled through and not have to push it on anyone. And that's what solid relationships with demand partners will get you. And to be clear, every value chain needs a range of demand partners. You never want to build a value chain around one demand partner. That's a very bad idea, right? You always want redundancy and you want variety. And that's a slightly different conversation, but important to I think, point out. All right, next slide. Oh, I should also say, feel free to stop me at any point if you have a question. I'm more than happy to try to answer it. And I don't want you to kind of have a question and then not be focused on the question and not pick up the rest of it. So interrupt me at any point. So there are three types of demand that we talk about: effective demand, ineffective demand, and nascent demand. Effective demand is when folks have the money to buy something, but there's not enough of it around for one reason or another, right? So it might be, in Vermont, there are a lot of people, and I think in many places, there are people who would buy housing if it was there, but it isn't there. The supply doesn't exist, right? And so a value chain that was devoted to producing the kind of housing that people really wanted to buy would not have a problem. They would be able to connect with demand because folks have the money to spend. They want to be able to spend it. There just isn't any stock to spend it on. Okay, so that's a relatively straightforward kind of challenge to solve, and there may be all kinds of innovative ways to solve it, but at least it's pretty straightforward. Ineffective demand is when people want something, they know they want it, but they don't have the money to spend on it. And so, one example of ineffective demand that I suspect we all see all around us is for healthcare and healthcare services. If people could afford healthcare, they would get healthcare. They wouldn't put off going to the doctor. They wouldn't put off buying their medicine if they could afford it, but they can't, so they do. So if you could figure out through a value chain how to use some of that great biotech and some of the other things that are out there to deliver affordable healthcare to people, they'd be all over it, broadly speaking, right? And a concrete example of this, I give you two concrete examples. One is and again, this is from a developing country, but it has implications for the U.S. as well, which I would say parenthetically has become something of a developing country in many areas, sadly. Um, the in India, people could not afford to buy shampoo. Why? Because it came in units that were larger than they could afford. They couldn't afford the cash outlay to buy a bottle of shampoo. So an entrepreneur looked at that and said, huh, how am I going to solve this problem? And they said, well, I'm going to start making shampoo and selling it in little packets, single-use packets. And lo and behold, right, people were thrilled to be able to buy single-use packets. They could afford them. And even if it meant they only got to wash their hair once a month, that was better than having to never wash their hair, right? So that was a way of changing the actual presentation and sizing of the product to make ineffective demand into effective demand. I'm going to keep going. I could go on with other stories, but I'm going to keep going, and we can come back to this if you want more examples. Nascent demand is a different kind of animal. Nascent demand is a fascinating animal. It's the demand that people don't know they have yet. So for those of us who grew up well before the era of cell phones, none of us would have said what we really need in our life is a cell phone. We didn't even have a concept of the idea of a cell phone, what a cell phone was, what it could be, how it could work, what it would do to change our lives. No idea. So we weren't going to say that. But once it was invented and appeared and got into the world, how many people do we all know now who don't have a cell phone? Not very many, right? That's nascent demand. So there are, again, tons and tons of examples of areas where somebody has come up with something that no one knew they wanted or needed until they saw it, and all of a sudden they were like, oh my God. So I have another example for you. I'm an older person, and so one of the challenges I face increasingly are things like, opening jars, right? How do you get the thing to open? Well, it turns out that there's this little gizmo that I can't even remember which one of the sort of famous kitchen tool makers came up with. And it's very simple, and you kind of put it on the jar and it cracks that seal so that you can then twist it open very easily, and it uses leverage to crack it, so you don't need any strength. Well, no one knew that such a thing presumably was available until it was available. But once it hit the stores and people realized what it was and what it could do, it's tons of people bought them because they're cheap and they're simple and they solve a problem, right? But before that, I was one of these people that would lean down and knock the thing on the floor, to get it open, right? So who knew that you didn't have to do that? So the exciting thing about nascent demand, I think, is that it unlocks, so do the other types of demand, but nascent demand more than the other two, unlock the creativity aspect of building value chains and building wealth creation value chains. You can be extremely creative in trying to figure out what's the nascent demand that your value chain can meet that other people don't even know yet that they really have. All right, next slide, please. So here's what it means to be demand driven. It means you need to know your demand partners. It doesn't mean that you've conducted a survey or you've done market research. It does not mean that. That's not part of this puzzle. It can inform this puzzle. It can tell you something about the conditions around you, but it's not what we're talking about when we talk about demand driven. We're talking about actually knowing who the buyers are going to be for your value chain, and then designing and organizing your value chain to meet their specific needs. Whether the thing that keeps them up at night is insurance, and there's a way you can design your value chain to address that, or whether the thing that keeps them up at night is not being able to get enough of certain things, and you can figure out a way to make sure that that supply is steady, or whether what keeps them up at night is losing employees to some kind of crisis that's, like, for example, the extradition of Haitians now is crippling a whole bunch of employers who are just freaking out because if they lose their labor force, they've lost their nursing home, they've lost their construction business, they've lost their whatever it is, right? So how do you help those folks think through their problem? How do you create a value chain that helps address that? That's got real value to the person to the organizations and businesses that are gonna utilize your value chain and support your value chain. So the trick, of course, is to organize your value chain in a way that simultaneously meets the needs of your demand partners and creates multiple forms of wealth. And the interesting thing about that is it's good not only for your value chain, but it's also often really good for the demand partners. So I'm going to give you a story that's kind of interesting. Apple growers in Massachusetts, primarily Massachusetts, were growing for I can't think, Red Tomato, which is a distributor, an agricultural distributor. And they had been doing it for years, and they were growing integrated pest management, organic apples. And Red Tomato had built quite a clientele among grocery stores and other wholesale buyers for these particular apples. And one year, and because they had the story of the farmers linked to the apples and the whole deal, right? And there was quite an interest in these apples. So one year, the conditions for apple growing were terrible. There was a freeze, and all the blossoms froze, and there just weren't going to be any apples. So the growers said to Red Tomato, "We aren't going to have apples for you this year. We can't. Our trees are not producing apples." Red Tomato could have said to them, "Okay, fine, goodbye. See you around. We're going to go buy our apples in Washington State, and too bad." But they didn't. And why didn't they? Because they had a years-long investment in these growers and their brand. And they knew that if they walked away from those growers and said, "We're not going to buy anything from you this year," those growers would go under. And they wouldn't be there for them in future years. So instead, what they said was, "Here's what we're going to do. We want you growers to figure out where you can get apples that are like what you produced for us, but that aren't yours. And we want you to buy them. And then we will buy them from you at enough of a margin to keep you in business." They didn't have to do that. Why'd they do it? They did it because they saw it was in their self-interest to do it. They weren't doing it to be nice. They were doing it because they knew that would keep these growers available to them in future years. And that product was one that they had taken the time and made the investment to establish in the market. So it was well worth their while to take a little bit of a hit in 1 year so that they could keep the thing going. Okay. So that's, that's the kind of demand partnership that you're looking to create. Okay, next. I talked a little bit about self-interest. So in wealth creation, in WealthWorks, in the framework, we talk about 3 kinds of interest. The first kind of interest is self-interest, which we all have. Like, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this? And that is the strongest motivator any of us have for what we do, one way or another, right? And so you need to understand the self-interest of your demand partner. What do they need? What are they trying to get out of this? What's in it for them? Because that's the first kind of interest you're going to need to meet to keep them at the table. The second kind of interest we call is shared interest, which is, what's in it for us? So when 2 or more of the value chain partners, and they might be 2 demand partners, or they might be demand partners and supply partners, when they can see that they share an interest, as in the Apple example, where the growers, it was good for the growers to stay in business, it was good for the demand partner to keep them in business. That was a shared interest, right? Then that's what that means. And the third kind of interest is a common interest. And a common interest is about what's good for the world, what's good for everyone, right? And so there was a certain common interest in the Apple story around having organically grown apples. The idea that organically grown apples are better for the planet than non-organically grown apples. Integrated pest management is better than heavy use of pesticide. Okay, right? So they had both made a commitment to that common interest, to have food that was safer for the environment and safer for consumers. So it's important to think about all those 3 levels. All right, we've talked about demand partners. So they're not the end consumer. They're the businesses or organizations that serve the end consumer, and they're the intermediary connector between the supply and retail consumers. So in a food chain, right, you might have hospitals or school systems or retail stores or, excuse me, manufacturers of food products. We did some interesting work in Afghanistan where a lot of the demand partners were actually manufacturers who needed input to be able to make things like ketchup and stewed tomatoes and things like that there. Okay, and there are parallels, obviously, in any sector. So what makes a good demand partner for a WealthWorks value chain? First of all, they need to be a legitimate bona fide intermediate buyer, not a consultant, not a 3 steps removed from the process, but an actual buyer with actual skin in the game, right? Who has their finger on the pulse of demand because they have to survive, right? That is what they need to be able to do, and they need to do it well. They need to be seeking goods and services that aren't readily available. And if you talk to almost anyone, particularly today with the amount of uncertainty in our economy, about what keeps them up at night as a buyer and what it is they'd really like to have and how they see demand changing and what they think their consumers are going to want next year, you're going to come up with something. There's going to be something in that conversation that tells you, oh my goodness, if we could solve this problem, then we'd have an edge. We'd be getting ourselves out of the commodity biz into the specialized product biz, where you have a lot more control. You're looking for somebody where the volume of demand is greater than can be met by any single existing business in a place. So if the volume of demand is really small, then maybe one business can meet it and you don't need a value chain. You're looking for a volume of demand that is so big that none of the single businesses in your value chain can hope to meet it. They have to work together to be able to do that. So really interesting example during COVID, there's a value chain in North Carolina that's based on textiles, and they had been making clothing and all kinds of other things out of textiles, t-shirts and whatever, and they all worked together and they had clients that wanted more than any single group could produce by themselves. And then all of a sudden it was COVID and nobody was shopping anymore, and clothes were not going to be hot sellers. And so the question was, how could they pivot? What could they pivot to? And they realized fairly quickly they could pivot to masks and smocks. And they did. And they had to connect with different buyers because they were not the same groups, but they were able to create new demand partners. And because they were already linked together as a value chain, they could quickly produce what was needed by those demand partners. So they diversified their entire value chain in response to a crisis. But they were able to do that because they already were working together to create volume that was much greater than any one of them could possibly have done on their own. And the fourth one is you're looking for a buyer who sees their own self-interest in partnering with regional firms to build stronger communities and a stronger and more resilient economy. And this is a leap of faith. You have to get over the idea that everybody who runs a for-profit business is evil. You have to get over the idea that everybody is only in it for themselves. It's really tempting in the time that we're living in right now to fall into the trap of thinking that. But it's just not true. It's just not. And if you go and you may not every partner in a value chain is the right partner. You may not find the right demand partner the first time you look. But if you keep looking, I can pretty well guarantee you, whatever sector you're looking in, you will find somebody, some partner who cares about some of the same things you care about. You don't have to sing Kumbaya. You don't have to have the same entire set of values, but there will be some place where you can agree enough to create a relationship. And that's all you need. You don't need to agree about everything. All right. 3 more characteristics. They have to be flexible enough to adjust their procurement practices to meet the needs of your value chain. That can look like all kinds of things. It can look like saying, okay, we're willing to, even though we've always taken something made of plastic, now we're willing to take something made of metal. Or it might mean we've always taken deliveries only on Monday, and now for whatever reason, we're going to need to take them on Wednesdays. We can do that. Or we need our things to be certified in the following ways, and the only certification body is halfway around the world. Let's figure out how we can solve that problem together, right? But they have to be willing to work with you to figure out how to solve those problems. They may have the willingness and ability to invest in your value chain if you can work together to understand how it's going to meet their needs. And then finally, they need to be solvent, right? They need to actually be a real bona fide business that isn't just, trying to scam you as a value chain. They need to be solvent, they need to be honest, and they need to be non-exploitive. So in other words, they need to be willing to understand that they need to pay a price that will support the workers in your value chain and will support the businesses in your value chain. They can't, if they're Walmart and what they're going to do is squeeze you all down to nothingness, that's not a good value chain partner for wealth creation, right? You need to figure out a way that things are more equitably, benefits are more equitably shared. All right. So here's how you go about identifying these mysterious folks. Think about your sector, whether it's biotech, whether it's tourism, whether it's agriculture, whether it's manufacturing. What is it that you're currently producing in your region, including the byproducts of that production, whether or not they're used for anything now or not? And by the way, did you know that tomato peels can be used in making tires, rubber tires? Yeah. the things you learn when you start looking into waste products. Look at the underutilized, potentially productive resources that may exist in your place. So in work that we did through this, at the beginning of the creation of WealthWorks, we did a lot of work in the South. And in the South, a lot of farmers had unutilized land. They just couldn't grow anything valuable on it, didn't know how to do that. And we were able to help them bring some of that land, not we directly, but our partners, bring some of that land back into production in ways that worked because there were demand partners for what they were growing on that land suddenly, where there hadn't been before. Think about entrepreneurial ideas and practices that you know about. Think about technologies you may have thought of or heard of or not heard of, but you could do some research and find out about. Think about both effective, nascent, and ineffective demand with respect to the resources you have. And then, yeah, brainstorm some of the subsectors in which you might want to try to identify potential demand partners. So manufacturing is huge. Manufacturing of food products, that narrows it down a little bit. Manufacturing of food products that are frozen narrows it down some more, right? Manufacturing of fruits and vegetables or dairy or whatever, right? So you're looking for something that's relatively specific to start.
Yep. I was thinking, Shauna, maybe you can talk about some of the work that we did in Afghanistan around those products as an example, just because it was so interesting. But yeah, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so we ended up looking at 3 different value chains, right? We looked at one for tomatoes and a whole range of tomato products. We looked at one for fiber and a whole range of fiber products, wool essentially products. Mm-hmm. And now I'm trying to remember what the third one was. What was the third one?
I think it was energy. Like it was more broadly energy, but we really focused on the tomatoes and the wool more. But yeah.
And the energy one was actually really interesting. It was about solar, and it was about trying to Afghanistan is both a very cold place and a very hot place. And at the time of harvest, it's a very hot place, and very few people have the ability to refrigerate their harvest. So it has a very, very limited shelf life. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways to use solar is in cooling. And so that was part of, anyway, it's coming back to me now. That was part of what we looked at. But yeah, I mean, we discovered that in the range of things that could be produced with raw tomatoes, there was a huge list of potential products. I mean, we probably came up with, I don't know, 30, 40 different types of products. And then we were able to find, by looking at demand partners, which demand partners had an interest in which kinds of products and why, and how much and at what scale. And the other thing that we discovered that was so fascinating is that we also asked demand partners, would you be willing to invest in a value chain that could help you do these things, get these products? And an astonishingly high percent, I would say, I don't know, between 80 and 90% of the potential buyers said, yes, we would invest in this value chain, not just Sometimes we would invest money, but we would also invest our expertise. We would help with our warehouse, give them our warehousing space, to be able to share that. We would share trucking. We would share our, our marketing expertise. We absolutely would be willing to invest in any number of ways in assuring the supply, because they understood that they were missing out, absolutely missing out. There was a complete disconnect, almost 100% disconnect between local production and local processing. No one had filled that gap, because the local production, they'd come out of the field and it was too hot and the stuff would rot, and then they couldn't use it in local manufacturing. There was no transportation system, there was no infrastructure. Anyway, it was a very, very interesting thing. So often as you start to look at these opportunities, it becomes apparent what the gaps are. So here's another example from the US. In Kentucky, the MASED decided, the Mountain Association for Community and Economic Development, decided that they wanted to tackle the problem that most people have homes in Kentucky that are not energy efficient. And it's very interesting because Kentucky has one of the lowest rates of energy cost per unit per kilowatt of anywhere in the country. And yet on a household basis, they pay among the highest bills of any place in the country. Think about that for a minute. Lowest cost per unit, highest bills. What's wrong with this picture? There's no conservation, right? So how do you make conservation affordable? Well, turns out that the lack of conservation was a problem, not just for the homeowners, but for the utilities, particularly the rural electric co-ops, of which there are quite a few in Kentucky. Their problem was their customers were getting further and further behind in paying their bills. And their customers were their members. And it was very uncomfortable for a co-op to have to deal with members who were behind on their bills. So even though the co-ops and MASED had been at loggerheads for years over environmental issues, when MASED approached them and said, look, we're trying to figure out how to solve this problem of conserving energy at the household level, would you be willing to work with us? Much to MASED's, I think, astonishment, kind of jaw-dropping astonishment, the co-op said, yeah, we would work with you, and here's why. Because we can't continue like this. We cannot keep having our people not be able to pay their bills. This isn't sustainable. What they ended up doing was discovering something called on-bill financing, which is simply a way to pay for energy improvements in the home over time that travels with the home. And it means that people who could not afford energy upgrades could suddenly afford it with on-bill financing because they didn't have to pay anything up front. Not only that, but by the time their houses were made more energy efficient, they were, of course, also made more valuable. So to the extent that they owned their homes versus the part the bank owned, that part that they owned grew in value. So their assets were going up, right? They also were able to employ a bunch of Kentuckians in doing the actual work, and other firms in providing the insulation and that kind of stuff. So it became quite an interesting value chain. But that's another example. All right. So this is sort of a few hints on how to actually build this relationship that's so critical to the success of these value chains. First of all, once you narrow down what kind of demand partner you're looking for, do your homework. Learn about them and learn some of their business vocabulary. Nothing puts people at ease quicker than when you can speak some of their language. And when you know what language they use and what language they don't use, right? So read some of their trade publications, go to the library, look on the internet, get some familiarity with what's going on in that subsector, and who the players are and how they work and all that kind of stuff. Develop a set of questions to ask with follow-up questions. Obviously, the questions may vary by the kind of buyer you're talking to, but all of the questions should revolve around some version of what keeps you up at night, right? Some version of what are the problems that you buyer need to solve in order for you to flourish. What you're not doing, I just want to emphasize this, what you're not doing is saying, we're creating a value chain that makes shoes. How would you like some shoes? Okay. We're interested in creating a value chain that makes shoes. We understand that you buy a lot of shoes for, construction workers that need to have certain characteristics, and we'd really like to learn more about what kind of shoes you're looking for, what you're getting now, what you're not getting now, and whether there are some issues in your sector that are really problematic and keeping you up at night, and what those might be. Okay, think about that. It's a completely different take, and it's really powerful. It's really important.
Mm-hmm.
So then actually get in front of these folks. You can do it potentially, I guess, by Zoom, but I think it's also really great if they're close enough and you can actually meet them.
Mm-hmm.
And let them know what you're doing. And then see if you can find some points of mutual shared interest. And it might be as simple as somebody saying to you, we can't make our boots out of leather anymore. And we don't want to make them out of a substance that's poisonous. And all we're getting right now is our plastics that we're not comfortable with. And we're getting a bunch of pushback on that. So we don't know, because we're not in the shoe manufacturing business, but if you could come up with a biodegradable substance that's not poisonous, that we could make really hard shoes out of that would wear well, we'd be really interested in that. Tick, 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 right? I mean, think about now how you would need to design a value chain to actually meet that need, and what you'd need to know and who you'd need to start talking to. Probably not people you've ever talked to before, right? But doable. That's the role of a value chain coordinator, right? That's the role, to come in at that moment and say, oh my gosh, what can I learn about biodegradable materials that either are being or could be used in shoes for construction workers? And that will take you off in a bunch of really interesting directions. Really interesting directions. And, and then your value chain will grow from there, right? Because you'll know what are the functions you need to have in that chain to ultimately, at the end of the day, be able to meet this buyer's needs. And and pretty good bet that if you keep on talking to more buyers, you may find more buyers who say, yeah, me too. Right? So here are some of the possible questions. And I think we actually used some of these in when we were doing the work in Afghanistan. What are the biggest challenges you're having with your business? What are your customers demanding that you can't reliably supply now? What would you like to be able to buy and sell if you could get it? I mean, again, often these folks have their fingers on the pulse of the market, and they know that there's ineffective demand or even effective demand or possibly nascent demand for something, and they know that. They just have no idea how to meet it. If they buy their inputs from outside the region that you're in, would they be willing to buy them from within the region if they were available within the region? And outside of making a profit, yes, businesses need to make a profit, otherwise there's no point for them, and no way really for them to stay in business, or fulfilling their mission. What matters most to them? So are they interested in their image? Are they interested in helping their community? Are they interested in selling local products? Are they interested in the environment? Are they interested in global warming? What drives them? What do they want their lives to stand for? What do they want their company to stand for? What do they want to be known for? What do they want to know they've contributed to? Because believe it or not, there are an awful lot of people in business who care about those kinds of things, right? And then you always also, of course, want to say, what questions do you have for me? So they can get to know you better. And there's no shame in saying, this is an exploratory conversation. We don't know exactly the shape that our value chain is going to take yet, but we do know we have resources X, Y, and Z in this area. we have people who know how to design shoes and produce shoes and da 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 da. And we have packaging businesses that can package shoes, and we have whatever it is. We don't know exactly how we're going to put this all together yet. We really wanted to start by understanding more about the demand side. And that's fine. And then, of course, can I get back to you when I have more information, or are there particular questions you'd like me to be able to answer for you before I come back to you, or whatever that is?
Or is there somebody else I should be talking to, I guess, also?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, what you're doing here is building a relationship, right? And maybe you're not building a relationship. Maybe the answers are such that you decide this is not a good value chain partner for any one of a number of reasons. And it's just, thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate it. But maybe you've hit a right partner, and you are building a relationship, right?
Yep. I guess I just also wanted to say, the work we did in Afghanistan, we didn't even have a sector. So in that case, we started even earlier. We had folks on the ground who were actually, we were trying to figure out what the sectors might be. And in that case, I know we sent people out to talk to just like big players, like big institutions, large businesses, I think maybe some government agencies, just to ask that question of like, what's keeping you up at night, right? Like, what are you having trouble with? And like through those interviews, the folks on the ground were able to uncover like, I think 100 market opportunities in a whole bunch of different sectors. So I think there are different points at which you can start this process. One is having a sector that you're already thinking about, and the other is just reaching out to kind of the big players in the region to say, what are the challenges you're experiencing, and are there ways that we can be helping by creating some sort of market opportunity? Like, what's the market opportunity that's going to relate to the problem you're having? I guess I just wanted to bring that up because I think, I don't think you have to have a sector necessarily in mind either, although it sounds like everybody on this call has something in mind, but.
Well, and the other thing I would add to that is, even if you do have a sector in mind, and I think it does help. I mean, Melissa's right. We started at an interesting point in Afghanistan, but it's really helpful to think about the unusual partners, right?
Yes.
So if you're in the tourism sector, for example, what about the bus tour operators? What about the hotel owners? What about the airlines?
Yep.
Who fly into your region? What is it that they would like to be able to offer to their customers that they can't offer now? What about the universities and higher education people? So the point being that one of the ways to think about value chains, wealth creation value chains, is to think in terms of who are all the different groups who potentially could benefit if this value chain that you're starting to envision were alive and well. Sometimes public safety is a overlooked but important player in all of this. Sometimes real estate people are an overlooked but important player, right? Because they're looking for folks to be able to purchase real estate. The more visitors in the area, the more people might like to settle in the area. They might have a vested interest, right? So again, there's room for a lot of stretching, a lot of creativity, a lot of meeting people you didn't think you'd ever be talking to. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think this would be a great time to kind of break for any questions folks have, or brainstorming you want to do about your sectors. I did put this kind of homework assignment together, which is to identify a couple of demand partners and the sectors you're thinking about and doing some research before we meet next. And then after we meet next, actually trying reaching out to one or two of them and see how that process goes. But I wanted to open it up for questions. We still have a half hour. So yeah, anything on people's minds, sectors that you want to talk about? I'm going to stop this for a second so I can see you all. But yeah, anyway, feel free to unmute, talk. Or questions you might have for Shauna about anything she's presented.
Or anything you might be imagining for the sectors that
Yeah,
you're interested in. Anything that
absolutely.
you're...
Yeah, Amanda.
Yeah, so I don't know. My thought is like for potential demand. So we have Chobani that's coming in. We also have another yogurt manufacturer, and Faye, and Chobani, this is their second plant in our region. So it's putting a big strain on dairy, but also that's like all your eggs in one basket. What would be a good way to kind of like address that, I guess? And I mean, we don't want a bunch of specialty yogurt shops unless we want to be the Yogurt Valley. I don't know. Yeah, we'll be the Yogurt Valley. But like, I just don't know when you have a huge demand like that, how to fit them into the big picture.
The first place that I would start, and I don't know the answer to this off the top of my head, but it would be definitely discoverable, is what are all the waste products in the yogurt manufacturing stream?
Yeah.
Because, right, you've got it happening at scale. The more value that can be added to those waste products, that's a win-win-win-win-win for everybody, right? So I'm guessing there's some kind of liquid waste. I'm guessing there might be solid waste.
There's the biggest waste is really the whey.
Yep, the whey.
And sometimes the way they distribute the milk products, there's other wastes. I do know that Chobani does do some stuff with powdered whey. And I think they're also, the last time I was at a presentation, they're also doing shelf stable protein something, but specifically for underserved and disadvantaged communities.
Yep.
So yeah.
It's interesting because one of the things that Melissa and I discovered in the Afghanistan work is the rather odd buying practices of the international development community. And there's a tremendous demand for that kind of thing in international development, right? Sources of protein that are portable, that are light, that are shippable, all that kind of stuff. So it would be interesting, I think, potentially to sit down and talk with Chobani, which I know is a pretty progressive company in the scheme of companies, and say, look, what of your waste products are you utilizing? Which ones aren't you utilizing? How are you utilizing the ones you're utilizing? And is there a way to expand the market for them? What percentage are you utilizing? Are you utilizing, 10% or 100% or, and if you're going to have now another yogurt maker coming into the region, how about that? And is there a way to build a value chain that begins with the farmers? So I don't know the answer to this, right? But is there a way that by the time the product arrives to the yogurt makers, it's been pre-refined, as it were, so that their process is more economical and the waste is captured earlier and is able to spin off into what we would call a chainlet. That's sort of parallel to yogurt, right? A lot of what's true in food manufacturing, and again, I'm not an expert, I'm using what I've learned over the years on this, is that the nature of the input is hugely important, right? It needs to be, if it's milk, it needs to be consistently of a certain fat content, of a certain, right? It can't be all over the map. It's got to be tested and within a certain range. So what do they do with the milk that they get that doesn't meet those standards? and just, those questions kind of, and is there, I'm thinking of maple syrup now, and I don't know if this works for milk or not, but right, the reverse osmosis process for maple, right, that gets the water out before the boiling starts so that it boils much faster. I don't know if there's a parallel to that in manufacturing of yogurt, but I would wonder.
Sounds fun.
That's one avenue, right? The other avenue is those dairies produce male calves.
Mm-hmm.
Those male calves are not ever going to be milkers. What happens to them? We did a study at one point in Vermont looking at what you could do with bob calves.
Mm-hmm.
And what it would look like if you raised bob calves on grass so that you had a grass-fed beef product to a particularly high standard with a particular set of protocols, and a whole bunch of farmers followed the same protocols. So you had a standardized product. Would there be a market for that product, and how would that work? And we concluded that yes, there would be, and yes, it could work. It would require a lot of coordination, and it's not what dairy farmers are used to doing, but it wouldn't have to be the dairy farmers doing it. You could spawn an entirely new industry, right? Using, again, the resources that you already have, many of them, right? So there's that. There's what do you do with cow manure, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's what do you do, right? Are the fields that the dairy farmers are utilizing as utilized as they could be? Is the forest land connected with those dairy farms as utilized as it could be? There's even things like some dairy farms have sold land to solar. I don't know if that's happened in your area, but yeah. And so we had one person I can't remember now which project this was. Oh yeah, it was Ohio, I think, where they were looking at mushrooms, growing mushrooms under solar panels.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, it's really about thinking broadly, right? And not just thinking about the things that you already know or that you've already seen, but thinking about how do you build on what you've got, and trying not to overlook. The problem is that we've learned not to see the things that are underutilized. They just don't register. So sort of, wiping the slate clean, the mental slate clean, taking a step back and saying, wait, what's here that really is underutilized?
Mm-hmm. Cool. Lisa, what's on your mind?
I was just going to share that we're actually kind of experiencing this through our spaceport feasibility study. Obviously, we're not really doing the value chain, but we're finding out things, what else spaceport can be used for. But the interesting thing is, obviously, we are in an area of we're either oil or we're ag here. That's what we are. Well, what we found is that there's a lot of, we do know, everybody knows that a launch requires a lot of water.
Yes.
But what one of our counties called our attention was, we have a lot of brackish water from the oil industry. Well, we found out through that we can actually use that for space launch. It doesn't have to be clean water. We can use reverse osmosis, clean it up enough, and that can be used. So obviously, like I said, we're experiencing the value chain through this feasibility study, because we're seeing, okay, there's all these other things we can do on a spaceport, which is really interesting. There's battery testing and vehicle test. There's all kinds of things we can do, but also finding out that, we can bring the oil industry in, and we can also use the land. So if we lease the land, because we're talking like university lands, things like that, that's what they're called in Texas. We could still lease it to ranchers. So ranchers could still have their cattle on the land and things like that. So it's just something that we're actually experiencing as we go through this study. What all can be involved in it, not just launching rockets.
That's great. That's wonderful.
That's cool.
What you're saying reminds me of a few years ago now, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, there were a bunch of brewers made headlines by figuring out brewing technology that was water saving, because brewing also requires a lot of water, right? part of what I think is really amazing about being alive at this particular moment in history is the technology. And, both biotech and, hard tech and all kinds of other tech where we can think about things in new ways, right? And we can figure out new ways to do things. And now how do we incorporate those water saving, waste saving, healthier making technologies into value chains so that people both produce differently and consume differently?
Well, to continue kind of on that brackish water front, just to share another thing that's going on, especially for you and the ag, all y'all with the ag stuff. One of our senators is also using that. They're doing a test where they're using the brackish water, cleaning it up, and they're actually currently using it on fields, on ag fields. And it's actually, they're finding that the water is actually cleaner than most of our drinkable water once they put it through the system.
Wow.
And so they are figuring it's going to be used further down the road, but right now they are using it on fields as irrigation, and it's been very successful.
Very interesting. And that makes me think about so where are the companies that are making the water cleaning technology?
Right.
Right. And how, if there's a value chain, right? How does that build into making your region more viable economically, right? So it's not just happening in one centralized place, but maybe it's a portable system, and every I don't know, who knows? Every municipality has one, or I don't know how it looks, but it's interesting, right?
Yeah, that makes me think it's a little bit different, but when we used to do training, there was a training person. Remember, Shauna, the person from Leadville, Colorado?
Yeah.
Which is like a very high altitude place. And we were
I do remember they were doing aviation.
Talking about different ways of using their status as like one of the highest altitude places in the US, and like how you could use that which is a very place-based characteristic, right? That you could use in a lot of different ways. Like it was a place that they had a lot of like races and training, and but there were all these other ways that you could just use that characteristic in that place for different economic, sectors. So that's what that makes me think of. But yeah, Amanda.
Oh, I had a question for Lisa, just because I saw this USDA grant, but I don't know enough about any of this, but do they use any like the brackish water? You said they're putting it on the fields, but do they do any fertilizer like creation? Here, I'll put a link so you don't think I'm super crazy. Because the USDA just put out funding for like fertilizer investment and stuff. Yeah.
I saw that just came through. Yep, I saw that came through, and that I don't know. That hasn't been requested of me or anything, but I did see that came through today.
Cool. Neat. All right.
Well, a lot of fertilizer is based on petroleum product, right?
It is.
So where's the connection? How does that work? And how could it work?
Yeah. Oh, you're still muted.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I wasn't sure if you were talking to us or not, but yeah. Anybody, any other questions, thoughts, anything you want to kind of brainstorm while we have Shauna with us? Okay. All right. Cool. Well, that's, this is the time if you have anything on your mind, but this is what I'm hoping we'll do over the next few weeks is really dig in your place into a potential sector, subsector that you're thinking about. And again, I'm always available to chat through any of this, but Shauna's here now. So if there's something on your mind or a particular subsector or market opportunity you're thinking about, this is where we are in our cohort. Where our goal is to reach out to some demand partners, learn about demand partners, and see if we can come up with a market opportunity to move through in terms of once we get into mapping. As always, there are some great resources. This is the original WealthWorks website, and then the NATO Wealth Creation site, which I need to find a different picture. There's so much more on this site than what it shows here. And I'm putting together a wealth creation session for Nevada, for Reno. I'm hoping that some of you might come and talk about what you're up to. So if you are, please reach out to me. I am going to be putting together a session and would love to have some folks besides me talking. So yeah, and that is all I've got for you. But yeah, anything else on anybody's minds before I? Oh, yes, good. Thank you, Shauna. Go ahead.
So this is the book that I wrote about wealth creation, and it has a lot more details than about demand and everything else, based on the experience that we had with the 3 different parts of the country: the Deep South, Central Appalachia, and the Lower Rio Grande Valley. And yeah, I think it's a good read, but it's available wherever fine books are sold.
Yeah, I'm sure I could. I was gonna, well, yeah, I was trying to, oh, here's one. I was, I'm again trying to, yeah, here it is on Thrift Books. Oh, well, those might be used, but you can go to Amazon too. I'm just trying to stay away from Amazon myself, but you can find it probably at like whatever that bookshop app is, or yeah, you can find it anywhere, I'm sure. So yes.
Hey, I have a quick question. When was that
Yeah.
study done about like electric in Kentucky? I'm just out of curiosity. Or when they worked with the co-ops, because we do have very high electric bills here.
Yeah.
So that work was done, oh my gosh, I want to say it probably started around 2008.
Okay. I mean, just for example, like our house, we have a pool. I mean, our electric bill last month, it was hot, but $350. I don't know how reasonable that is where everybody else is at, but
Yeah. This is here's a, oh, sorry. Yeah, this is a case study about it that might be helpful.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I think there's a video about it on the
It's on
Access.
this link. Yeah, there's a video on here. It doesn't really say dates though, but yeah, I'm not sure when, if it there
It was
are
somewhere in
dates.
the between 2008 and 2015 in
Yes.
there.
I think it was more like 2010, 11 or something like that. But yeah, anyway, you can find out more information at that link, which might be helpful, including a video. But
Thank you.
yeah.
And then, sorry, just I'm very talkative today.
No,
but
go for it.
Lindsay, so I work in like clean energy in New York, so we have kind of higher prices, but we're the more rural area. But if you have your utility bill and you want me to look at it, I can let you know like what New York, I'm just nosy, I just am curious. But I can let you know from like our perspective what we've seen. I'll put my email in the chat.
Cool. That's
Yeah,
great.
because like they've recently raised rates again here.
Oh, wow.
With like ours is South Kentucky RECC is who we have. I will definitely get that to you.
Yeah, send me some info because like I know all of ours in New York State is like super regulated. They have rate classes, all this jazz, but I don't know what it is there, but I'll definitely take a look. I love energy.
Cool. I love it. All right.
Nice.
Anybody else? Anything? Okay. I don't want to belabor it, but it's been great conversation, great ideas. And yeah, Shauna, thank you so much for coming to talk to everybody. It's always nice to have people talking besides me. So thank you for that. And
You're most welcome. Good to meet you all.
yeah.
And great luck. Best of luck with what you're doing. I know Melissa will be a tremendous coach and guide for you, and yeah, I hope very wonderful and creative things come out of your work.
Yeah. Anyway, yes, I will send, as always, I will be putting this recording up and the slides, and I'll send a note about the assignment. And, again, if you have questions along the way, feel free to reach out. Happy to talk through any of this with you in your particular place with your particular sector. It's kind of fun. It's like a puzzle, sort of. So yeah, anyway, and we'll talk in 2 weeks and we'll see where you've gotten to with your research and kind of where you're going. So great to see you all, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. And thanks again, Shauna, and have a great rest of your week, everybody.